Hi everybody, Grandad here again. What am I up to? Well, I've got a few more sea creatures to show you. I made a couple of videos about things I'd found at the seaside, seashells and what have you. And while I was going through some of my boxes, I found some more things which I'd forgotten all about, because I was actually looking for that seahorse that I mentioned, and I still can't find that, unfortunately, but I found some other things. So I thought, well, it's nothing for it, I'll just have to make another video and show you those. Now, I remember telling you in the previous video about sea urchins that we were mentioning, and while I was in my shed, I thought I'd show you a few more fossilized sea urchins which I've discovered, and I thought I'd show them you because they're slightly different. This one is very similar, and it's in limestone, and it's turned to what we would call flint. Now you can tell it's a sea urchin because it's got that star shape on the front there. Very similar to the sand dollar, the very big sand dollar that I showed you. And I've got another one of those here in a minute, so you'll see that. But this is another one, and it's interesting, this one, because this one has got two holes in it. It's got one at the back here, which is where its waste material comes out of, and I think it's got one at the front here where it actually feeds. So this creature, and it probably in these markings on it, it had spikes. Almost certainly it was a spiny one, but the spines have gone away now, and it's left it as just a solid lump. So that's a sea urchin. Now I've got some more sea urchins here which I'll show. Now this one is a very old fossil. I mean, it is a fossil and very old, but it's a very old fossil anyway, because it came out of a collection and it's been written on there. I can't exactly see what it says it actually is, but this is another fossilized sea urchin, and it's come out of a fossil collection somewhere. And again, it's got the same sort of idea where you've got holes underneath where the mouth parts were, and it's got a nice star shape on the top. And these are sort of what they call heart-shaped sea urchins. And you very often find these. Once when I was on holiday at Borth in North Wales in England, I found a whole thousands of them washed up on the beach. And I gathered a few of them up, but because they were very delicate and very easy to break, a lot of them were broken, but I managed to find a few that weren't too broken. But they were so smelly and so fragile that they didn't last very long, and I wasn't able to keep them. So you know, when you get a stone one, you can hang on to it. And there's another one that's come out of a set, and again it shows you more detail on this one. The two holes, one is the bum, I suppose you'd call it, where the waste material comes out of, and the other one's the mouth. Now I'm not sure which is which, whether they eat from the middle and that's where they excrete their waste products, but you'd have to look it up to see which one it is. But this is the type of creature that would have landed on those Turritella shells that I was telling you about. So maybe the mouth is in the middle there, and they were able to excrete the acid from their stomachs through that hole and bore into sea creatures. Now I've got another one here which is like a little button, and this is quite a cute one, and again it's come out of a set somewhere because it's a very old fossil. I must have picked it up in an antique shop or something, but it's a tiny little sea urchin and a very pretty one. And again, there's many hundreds of different types of sea urchins, but those just happen to be fossilized ones, which are very good to look at. Now another type of sea urchin which I've got here is this one, and again this might be the kind of one that would land on a shell and drill a way through. Now this is rather interesting. It's sort of got teeth on the front. Very strange little sea urchin, and it's a bit like a sand dollar, but the sand dollar didn't have these teeth, so it's another species of sand dollar. And again, it's got the hole in the centre, which I think, I'm not right in saying, you'd have to look it up, but I think I'm right in saying that that is actually the mouth, which is very strange. One of the little points is broken off somehow, but it's probably the best one I could find. But they're found in limestone and various things. So, but that's another sea urchin. So there's many hundreds of different types of the same sort of creature that you find in the sea. Now, I'll show you this one, and this is rather interesting because I had a shop in Shrewsbury selling rocks and fossils and minerals many years ago, and a chap came in one day and he said he'd found a rock in the River Severn. Now, we're 70 miles from the sea, so I couldn't understand why, when he brought me this rock in, I could see that there was something on it. And when I got a magnifying glass, I was able to see roughly what it was. Now, obviously, he wanted to keep hold of it, so I haven't got the rock that it was in. But what I did, because I'm interested in this sort of thing, I made a mould of it. We're using latex rubber. Now, the actual mould is there. Now, I don't know how well this is going to show up on camera. I hope it shows up. But in case it doesn't, and you're not able to see exactly what that is, I made a drawing of it. And this is another way of sort of doing things. And this is a drawing of that little creature. I looked through a magnifying glass and I managed to see what it looked like. In cross-section, it would have looked like that, like a stem, with all spikes sticking out. And the actual thing, when it stuck out, would have looked like that. So I made a drawing of what I thought, it's a bit of an artist's interpretation, of what that thing looked like. Now, the only thing I could think of that looked like that, and this, like a hinge on the end of here, would have allowed it to wobble about. And these spikes would have been protective. Now, the only thing I could think of that looked a little bit like that is when I found sea urchins. Now, sea urchins had spikes, as I was telling you, and that looks, for all the world to me, like a spike of a sea urchin. Now, what that was doing in a rock on the River Severn in Shrewsbury, 70 miles from the coast, I have no idea. But it's strange. And this video I'm doing now, I'm going to call it Strange Things from the Sea or something. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to call it. But you do find some very peculiar things in very peculiar places. Now, one of the things you do find at the sea, and I've shown these before and I've got a video on them, so I'm not going to dwell on this too long because obviously I don't want these videos to go on too long for you. This is a shark's tooth, and you all know about shark's teeth, I'm sure. There are many thousands of different types of sharks, and shark's teeth, you find them, you know, in great quantities. But I thought I'd just mention it to show that I do know about shark's teeth, and you find them in the sea. Now, another thing which I mentioned, which you find in the sea, apart from seahorses, are these things. And this is a starfish. Now, I didn't actually buy this starfish. I think somebody bought it for me for a present. And looking at it, I mean, starfish, when you see them, they look like jelly. They don't look as if they've got a body shell at all. But this is almost certainly a real starfish. And you can see all the, innermost workings of this creature. And it's most beautiful. And again, I'm sad to say they probably killed this creature in order to sell it. As I say, I didn't actually buy this. Somebody bought it for me, I think. But starfish are another thing you can pick up in shops, all over the place. And they come in all sizes. That one's quite a big one, and different shapes. And in this box, I've got some more starfish. And some of them are really tiny. And what they've done here, they've not only somehow dried it out, but they're genuine starfish, I'm almost sure, but they've dyed them somehow. So you've got a blue one and a red one. Now, those obviously aren't the natural colours, but they found a way of dyeing these creatures to make them saleable, I suppose, and more desirable. So again, you can find those in shops, and people have them. Now, before I mentioned in the resin block that I was showing you, I showed you a crab. Now, this is a sand crab, and it says it's from the Pleistocene era, which is 2 million years old, from Java, the label says. Now, you can see quite plainly that this was once a living crab, but it's no longer a crab. So crabs have been around a long, long time. They're not one of the modern things at all. They've been around, and this one is said to be 2 million years old, and it comes from Java. But you can see quite plainly that it's a crab, very much like a crab we get today. In fact, it's exactly the same as you get a crab today. And that's a sand crab, fossilized and very old. Now, while we're on the subject of fossils, I've got one or two fossils here, which I'll show you. Now, I mentioned in the other one, video I did, that I mentioned coprolites. Now, people may not have realised what a coprolite was. A coprolite is a polite way of saying poo. It's secreted from animals in the sea, and lots of animals obviously secrete stuff in the sea. The fish, the crabs, the dolphins, everything has to go to the toilet sooner or later. And you find all sorts of what they call coprolites, which are fossilized pieces of stuff that have come. Now, this could very well be from a turtle or something. I'm not sure, because unless you're a real expert, you wouldn't know what sort of coprolite that was. But I bought that. It actually cost me £12, would you believe? I actually paid £12 for a lump of poo, which is rather funny. But as I say, I like collecting these things, so it interested me. And it was such a big lump, I thought, well, I've got to have that for my collection. So that's what you find in the sea if you're looking for coprolites. Now, another coprolite I bought, and this is a fish coprolite, and it comes from Scotland. Now, this one is rather interesting, because what somebody's done, they've chopped it in half like I do, the same as I do. I cut them up, and what they've done, they've cut this one to show the internal structure of the coprolite, and you can see inside. Now, this one is rather interesting, because the replacement fossil here, what's replaced the actual original material that this coprolite is made out of, is actually iron pyrites. And iron ore, presumably. There's iron in there as well, maybe hematite or some other kind of thing. So it looks gold, black and gold, and that's been polished. And again, it's a coprolite, and it's come from Scotland, but it's actually a lump of poo that's been polished. Now, another creature you get that's in the sea, which is very well known everywhere, is shrimps, and people eat shrimps and things like that. You go for a meal and you have a starter, and it's very often shrimps or prawns or something like that. Now, this is one, and I'll do the old trick of blowing on it just to make it a little bit wet, because on this you can't see it very well. But this is actually a little prawn or a similar thing to that, and I'm hoping it shows up on camera. And again, it's a bit like that fish I showed you. It's fossilized, and it's in the sediment, and they've chopped it through and exposed it. But that's a little shrimp or a prawn or some creature of that nature, and they were around millions of years ago, being eaten by goodness knows what in those days, dinosaurs presumably. Now, another thing you get in the sea is the bones of fish. Now, this is quite a big one, and I've got some tiny ones here. I mean, they come in all sorts of sizes, and these are really tiny ones, little tiny bits of vertebrae. But this is a little bit bigger, so I'll show you this one. Now, this is a vertebrae of a fish of some sort. I don't think it's a shark. It's some other kind of fish. It could be any sort of fish. I've no idea what sort of fish it is. But you find these occasionally in shops and lying about. You may find them on the beach if you're lucky. But these are fossilized ones. And that's a vertebrae of some kind of fish. So that's that one. Now, I was talking at one of the times about crinoids. Now, a crinoid is a type of creature that lived in the sea and many millions of years ago, but they still exist in very deep water. They found crinoids. Now, crinoids, I mean, they're a cross between a plant and an animal. I mean, they are an animal, but they look like a plant. So they have a root that sticks to a rock, then they have a tall, thin stem and a head on the top that waggles around, and they gather their nutrients. And they look a bit like palm trees. I mean, that's why if somebody said to me, what sort of plant does it look like? I'd say it looks like a palm tree. But they grow under the sea, and they still exist in very deep waters. They've discovered them. Now, this is a slab of crinoid stems, which has been in a death assemblage, where it's piled up on the bottom of the sea. And what we've done, my partner and I, we used to cut through slabs of this stuff and polish it so you could see the crinoids, the sections of stem of the crinoid. I mean, there's no heads, and there might be a few tentacles in there. I'm not quite sure. There's all sorts of bits in there that you can sort of perhaps recognize. I don't know. But the crinoid stem is usually round. But sometimes when you get crinoids, they're a different shape. Now, I've got some here. Now, again, these are very tiny, so I don't know how well they'll show up, which is probably why I haven't shown them before. But these I actually bought because they're so interesting. Now, these are parts from a crinoid stem, and they break off, look like washers lying in the sea. And normally they're round. Now, I don't know whether you're going to be able to see this, because it's so tiny. But there is a little crinoid, and it's like a cog. Looks like the cog in a wheel. And it's really tiny. And this is part of the stem of a crinoid. And there's another one. And again, they're really wee things. I've got to be careful I don't drop it, otherwise it'll end up in the hoover and I'll never see it again. But there it is, a little tiny crinoid stem. Now these are said to be fossil types. Is a crinoid stem, 150 million years old, Lower Jurassic, and they come from the Oxford clays. So you can find them all over the place, not in the sea anymore, they're on dry land, but you can certainly find fossils all over the place. Now, I mentioned already about corals, and I haven't got any corals on this particular episode, but this is actually a slice. I brought it in because it was interesting. Is a slice through a coral. And remember, we were looking at the corals like a big ball of, like a honeycomb. Well, this is a slice through one of those type of corals. And you can see the honeycomb shape of the coral inside there. And we used to cut and polish these to sell to schools to show children how corals looked inside. But that's a slice off a coral, which I made many years ago. And obviously we made a lot of them, so I've still got lots of them there. Now, another thing, if you're in England and you happen to visit a place called Portland Bill, which is, I don't know whether it's Somerset or somewhere like that, I'm not quite sure, I wouldn't like to swear to it, I might have got that wrong. There's a place called Portland Bill, and they have a famous limestone there called Portland limestone. And in that limestone, they have Tarantella shells. Now, we heard about the Tarantella, which I was looking at when it was a seashell. But in the rocks there, they have these Tarantellas, and I haven't got a particularly good example of it. But if you look in this rock here, this is a bit of Portland rock. And they don't sell this for building stone because it's got too many porous holes in it. But when it's a bit more solid than this, they cut it up and they make buildings out of it. And it's very well known of Portland. Now, if you look on there, you can see there's various holes. Now, each one of these holes is actually where one of those Tarantella shells actually was. It's now dissolved away or fell out, or in some cases you can actually unscrew it, which is giving you a clue to what I'm coming to. And when they found the ones that you can unscrew, they call them the Portland screw. And it's rather interesting. If you go to Portland and you find a piece of Portland rock, you might find that you can find a piece with a Tarantella shell you can actually unscrew out of the rock and screw it back in again. Now, I wasn't able to find a nice piece with a nice screwy piece, but I have seen them and you can get them. Now, another thing that you see in Portland, again in the Portland rock, and if you go into the, I think they've got a lighthouse and it's a bit of a museum. And if you go in there, you'll see another creature, which is a bivalve. It's just a two-part shell, like a mollusk. And I searched for one round about there, but they're quite difficult to find. And they have a special name for them. I don't know, and I can't quite remember what the name is. But if you visit the museum, you'll see them in there. And I don't know whether they call them the Portland tiger or the Portland dragon or some sort of Portland crab. I'm not quite sure what they call them. But they look a little bit like this. And the reason they call them different to what they actually are is because they seem to have teeth. Now, this is the back of the shell. I've got one here, and that would be the front. And where the hinge is at the back, it makes like a jaw. And this one, you can see, it's got a couple of protrusions there that look like teeth. And for some reason, they call this a Portland crocodile or a dragon. I'm not quite sure what they call it. But and there's another one, but unfortunately it's broke a little bit, so he's lost his lower jaw. But it's just a shell, but they have strange names for them, so you find weird and wonderful things all in the rocks. Now, when my sister was alive, many years ago, she went over to America for a visit to some friends of hers, and while she was there, they took her on a field trip, because they were interested in rocks and fossils and minerals, and they took her on a field trip, and she was able to find some fossils because they went on a fossil hunt. Now, she brought back to me, because she knew I was interested in them, all sorts of fossils. And I thought I'd show this as part of this video, but it's gone on for 19 minutes already, so I must hurry. This piece of stone, and they've been identified by people in America who looked at it. Now, that piece of fossilized stone doesn't look much, but in actual fact, it's the ear bone of a whale. Now, that's very strange because whales are actually mammals, and so they were on dry land at one time, but then they went into the sea and turned into a fish kind creature. But the ear has still got remnants of when it was a land animal, and all these bits in this particular bag are all bits of sections from whale ear bones. Now, another thing she brought back, which are interesting, and they come out of the sea, are this piece. And this, believe it or not, is a little bit of turtle shell. It's fossilized, but this is a shell of a fossilized creature that died millions of years ago, and it was found in Florida, and it's a little bit of turtle shell from a turtle, a sea turtle presumably. And again, I showed this one before on camera, but it's well worth another look because it's very rare, this one. This was one she found, and this is the jaw plate of a parrotfish. Now, these apparently are very rare, and she was very lucky to get this, so it's well worth another look at it. But this apparently, I'm told, and I have no reason not to believe them, that this is the jaw plates of a parrotfish. Now, this video's gone on longer than I thought it would, but there's two things I wanted to show you, which are probably the best things I wanted to show you, really. And this is this creature here. Now, I'll bring him in, and this is the weirdest thing. I bought this only just recently. Now, these are known as globefish. Now, the eyes on this fish, it's very light, and it comes from Taiwan, I think. And apparently the fishermen get these when they're fishing in their nets. These come up, and I don't think they eat them. I don't know whether they can be eaten, but they somehow dry them because it doesn't smell, and it's absolutely hollow. But it's got a beak on it like a parrot. Obviously, the eyes aren't real. Those have been stuck on to make it more attractive. But it's a strange little creature, and it's sometimes called a pufferfish or a globefish. And so that is my little globefish. And while I was there, I was so taken with this globefish that I actually bought another one. And this one is probably the most weird creature you could ever find in the sea. This is another pufferfish, but boy, how they got it to puff up and look like that, I just don't know. As I say, they've stuck the eyes on to make it look googly-eyed. But this is the strangest fish, and obviously this is a defensive mode, that it puffs itself up and makes itself as fierce as possible. But I can assure you, those spikes are absolutely razor sharp. I mean, you wouldn't want to bump into one of these in a dark night. And that's the, again, it's a pufferfish or a globefish, and they come from Taiwan, I believe. And it's got a different kind of mouth on it. It hasn't got the same sort of beak as that other one has. But wow, what a strange creature. So, as I say, keep your eyes open when you're out and about on the seashore, because you never know what you're going to find. You may find something as unusual as that. Well, that's all I got time for now. And until I come again and show you another interesting video, I'll just say don't forget to subscribe and press the like button if you like what I'm doing. And until next time, it's Grandad as usual signing off and saying goodbye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. With globefish. Bye-bye, everybody.